Serpent Entities. Now, just like some of the other entities, this particular entity exists in a different dimension and reality and can come through open negative portals in the land in this time-space reality. This energy can be found hanging around homes looking for a host, and it will look for places with high sexual energy that is lower toned. And an example of that is someone who watches a lot of porn, for example, would be a very good target for this energy. Now, the reason I say that is because when someone watches a lot of porn in their home, obviously there's a lot of high sexual energy. But what I mean about the lower tone is something like pornography. Pornography is designed and used by these lower energies in a way to kind of open pathways. Now, pornography is using the lowest sexual energy, the lower vibrations of sexual energy in a way that is degrading and all sorts of other stuff that we can go into about pornography. But it's not high vibe. It's not a high divine energy that comes through when you're watching pornography. Okay, that's just like how it is. It's a very lower toned energy, but it's using high sexual voltage with a lower tone. So that's the best example. Now, obviously, we could also talk about that sort of, the sexual industry. The whole pornography industry is designed to allow these energies to attach and operate through people. So pornography is one of the most upheld forms of high sexual, lower toned energy, which allows, it's like an open pathway for these energies to zip through. So pornography is one of those particular energies and particular things that open up pathways for this energy to attach. So that's what I mean by the, serpent energies, serpent entities loving to kind of find ways to be around that type of energy. Like snakes, they can go for a while between feeds. So sometimes it will go to places where lots of people are gathering just to create interference for fun. It might not necessarily need to feed, but it will still look for how it can actually interfere with people. And for some reason, this particular energy does like big gatherings. Now, it's another one with a high level of consciousness. This thing is very, very highly conscious, and it operates quite consciously as well, by the way that it likes to maneuver it likes to think a few steps ahead. So it is very conscious, and it uses its consciousness like a chessboard to make sure it plans steps ahead. It likes to feed off sexual energy, so it really likes gatherings like parties and rave parties and those types of parties that have lots of open sexual energy to play and run through. And it's definitely found in those lower, dirty vibrational dance parties where a lot of people are on drugs and sexually wide open. Now, this doesn't mean that every dance party is dirty and low vibrational. There are plenty of dance parties out there that are really high vibe, very clean and really beautiful. But there are a lot of dance parties around the world that are ran and operated by lower vibrations and lower entities operating through people to put these parties on in order to kind of bring a lot of food together. So, some people who are putting these parties on have these things running through them and operating through them. And this is the reason why they like to sometimes pull these parties together. They'll have a very high sexual vibration with a very low tone. So it's almost like the morals are really down, like really kind of in the gutter, and yet the sexual energy is on high voltage. So, and this is usually created through lots of low-grade drugs, lots of, particular music that tweaks and spikes sexual energy in the grid. It's a very, very well organized, kind of energy that knows how to pull things together and create the right environment for them to operate and obviously breed in. So, dance parties around the world that are, putting out low-grade drugs for people and blowing people sexually wide open with their music and their drugs is a breeding, feeding ground for these types of energies. Now, when it comes to attaching mechanisms, the attaching mechanisms is sexual energy with no boundaries or sexual energy with very low vibrational tones, like I just spoke about. Even a sexual connection via the eyes can allow an attachment spore. Now, this is really fascinating. I find this stuff extremely fascinating when it comes to entities and spores. Now, when I talk about spores, I want to let's just look at the definition of what a spore is from the dictionary, and then we can go on to talk about what I just spoke about. So the dictionary's frame of reference for a spore is a minute, typically one-celled reproductive unit capable of giving rise to a new individual without sexual fusion. Characteristics of lower plants and fungi. Now, this is basically showing us that this particular, spawning ability of some of these entities, it's designed so they can actually create a spore without any sexual fusion. They can actually create a spore that will give birth to more of themselves. So it's a way of basically reproducing without a sexual fusion. Now, earlier I said that a spore could be transferred just even with a glance of an eye. And what I mean by this is if this energy, if it's operating through somebody, it's going to be always on the lookout for somebody who has high sexual energy with not much boundaries. Now, this typically falls into the sort of please love me syndrome that a lot of people have on this planet, where they're not full within themselves and they're desperately looking for attention outside of themselves to fill them up. Now, if somebody's constantly looking for attention outside of themselves to fill them up and to feel worthy and to feel valued, then this allows them to start having no boundaries, because it's like they're so desperate for love that they will just be beaming this energy out. Now, these particular entities can smell this energy and feel this energy from a mile away. And this is kind of the energy they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who's constantly looking for any type of energy, sexual energy, to make them feel good. Now, if one of these people, if somebody's operating like this and they happen to meet the eye of another person who happens to have a serpent entity operating through them, that connection at eye level will be a sexual gaze. It will be sexual energy totally penetrated at that person. And if that person catches the eye of that person, of this entity running through the person, and kind of opens up to that intense sexual energy and kind of gives that permission for that energy to come through, this entity can actually throw a spore out and throw that spore into the person, because they've opened themselves up to that sexual energy at eye level. So I hope I expressed that, because the eyes are a window of the soul, and we all know this. It's a very common, saying that the windows are the eye of the soul, and that is very true. Our eyes are open pathways. With our eyes, we can actually allow permission for something to come in, but only if the integrity, if our boundaries are not correct. So it's really, really interesting that, when our eyes meet somebody, if we are desperate for their energy, we are like open pathways. And if someone meets our gaze with negative sexual tones and energy, they can actually penetrate that energy into our grid, just because we're open to that energy. Now, if somebody's really confident in themselves, they're not looking for love outside of themselves. They haven't got that please love me, please give me any attention, to show me I'm worthy. If someone hasn't got that going on, and this energy operating through someone's trying to look for, a prey, then somebody with, a strong sense of self and high moral integrity and sense of self, this energy won't even look at them, because it instantly knows there's no way to engage with that person, because if somebody's, really strong within themselves, that they're not looking for energy outside of themselves, if somebody tries to get their attention in that way, the person will instantly feel that low-grade, yucky energy coming at them, and they'll block it straight away. They won't have that open, kind of pathway trying to get any kind of food they can. They're going to be completely solid in themselves, and any energy coming through that doesn't feel good won't even be looked at. It will be blocked. So there's a huge difference in somebody who's very much got themselves together and they don't look for external things to fill them up, compared to somebody who's looking for everything to fill them up. You can see how they're definitely going to be more open and kind of beaming out to these energies, that they're a good food source, compared to somebody who's not looking for energy outside themselves and has actually contained themselves to only need themselves for validation. Then you can kind of see instantly how these energies are going to find it really hard to penetrate and get this energy to open up, because the person's not looking for validation outside of themselves. So less pathways open. Now the result in a person, once this energy has attached, it attaches lots of energetic cords into the sacral chakra, so it can control the person's sexual energy and appetite while it siphons all the vital force energy created. It is attached at the 4th dimensional level, but can come into the body and operate from there when activated. So this entity attaches at the 4th dimension. So it's actually attached at the person's state of mind and emotion. It's in that particular layer of the energy body. But when it is activated and it wants to feed and it wants to actually kind of be in control, it will come from the 4th dimensional aspect of that person into a 3rd dimensional aspect. So it actually can come into the body. It doesn't like to be in the physical body. It prefers to be on the 4th dimension, but it has more control in the 3rd dimension once it's in the person's body. So when it needs to, it can actually come down from the 4th dimension and actually live and kind of operate through the person's 3rd dimensional form. It can play at a sexual level that is harmless to the eye, but if this energy is operating in someone and someone catches the person's eye, like I said before, it has an energetic sexual connection for a moment, which is enough for that serpent to throw a spore into the person's energy matrix. So you don't even have to sleep with someone for an attachment. This energy can cause a person to do things they wouldn't normally do, and it can create them to focus on the opposite sex and play some really twisted games. If someone sleeps with someone with a serpent entity, they might just get a spore, but they also could end up with the actual full-blown grown serpent attaching to them. Or another possibility is it could drop its tail in your energy body. And the reason it will drop its tail in your energy body is once its tail is dropped in your energy body, it has the ability to repattern itself as another copy of itself. Now, how amazing is that? I want to explain that again. So there's 3 different ways that we can get infected by serpent energy. One is through spores. So we can get spores through sexual energy via the eyes. So if we catch a sexual glance with somebody who has this energy operating through them, if we allow that sexual connection via the eyes, that's enough for a spore to be thrown into our energy matrix, okay? And that will grow, if it stays attached, it will grow into a full-size serpent. But we can also get a spore through sexual intercourse with someone that has a serpent operating through them. So that's another way we can get a spore. So via sleeping with somebody or sexual eye contact, we can get a spore. We can also get the full-blown serpent attaching to us through sexual intercourse. Now, the full-blown serpent can't just attach to you through sexual eye contact. It needs to have sexual intercourse with somebody for the blown serpent to have permission to then transfer into the other person. So sexual intercourse allows either a spore or the full-blown serpent to transfer into the other person. Now, the only other way that we can get serpents attaching to us is through sexual intercourse or very, very intimate energetic connection. So sometimes if you went for a healing with somebody with a serpent operating through them, a hands-on healing, this could be enough to have one of these. If you were doing a hands-on healing for someone with a serpent entity attached to them, it's not guaranteed, but if it wanted to, it would also be able to drop its tail in your energy body. So through sexual intercourse or very intimate energetic connection, these things can drop their tail in your energy body. And the reason they do that, like I said, was they're able to repattern themselves and make a copy of themselves. So by dropping their tail, they're able to repattern themselves. And so they literally have another perfect copy of themselves operating somewhere else. Now, it's very, very different to creating a spore, because the spore is not a copy of itself. The spore is like a child. So when it throws a spore out, it's like having a child. But when it drops its tail and it repatterns itself, it's not like having a child, it's having a perfect clone copy of itself. So it's different. The spore will have its own thoughts, but the copy of itself, if it copies itself through dropping its tail, will share the one consciousness with the adult serpent and together work as one mind, where the spore becomes a separate thinker and has its own separate consciousness. So the spores are like children. If they drop their tail and repattern themselves, it's another copy of themselves and it shares the same consciousness. If it has a spore, it's like having children with their own individual consciousness. As far as I know, it can copy itself as many times as it likes, but the copies are never as strong as the original. So like I said, if they've dropped their tail and they actually repattern themselves, they can do this as many times as they like, it seems to be, but the copy is never ever as strong as itself. So the original serpent entity can be strong, but if it repatterns itself and makes copies of itself, those copies are actually quite weak. They're not strong. So yes, they can actually have more than one copy of themselves, but those copies are not very strong. They're quite weak. They can't do as much, and it's just literally, it's almost like the more it copies itself, the more copies of itself that's out there, it will actually get less strong as well. Like it won't have as much strength. So it's not something that it wants to do a lot, because it actually will weaken its own self as well. And the copies are quite weak. So it's not something that it wants to do a lot, but it can do it. And it can seem to do it as many times as it likes, but it doesn't seem to want to do it as much because of, like I said, the copies are weak and it does take energy out of the original serpent as well. The spores will gain power as they grow, and once mature, they can start creating spores themselves and copying themselves too if they want to drop their tail. So, the spores are basically children. They get to grow up, have their own individual consciousness, and once they mature, they can start creating spores and copying themselves too. But if they do drop their tail and repattern themselves, those copies, like I said, the copies are not very strong, and the copies can't throw spores, and the copies can't drop their tail. So the copies are very, very weak and are unable to go any further with the breeding or repatterning. Now, to start with, this person will, can feel really sexually open, and they can even feel amazing. They can feel really amazing about themselves, can have like this amazing energy and feel really sexually on fire, and they can feel good to start with. But once this energy has kind of used them and this particular energy has left, this is when the person can start to feel really dirty and used without knowing why, and completely depleted. It can feel like chronic fatigue for a long time after having a full-size serpent use you for a while. So, you know, if someone's had this energy operating through them and now it's left, the person can feel really used, really dirty, not understand what's gone on, and they can have chronic fatigue for a little bit because this energy has depleted them so badly. If a serpent is getting all its needs met in a host, then it can stay for quite a long time, but it will be very aware that if it wants to stay for a long time, it will actually be conscious not to run the host down too much, so it can maintain its host in a well enough state to carry out what it wants. So this is what I find interesting about this energy. It actually knows, once it attaches to somebody, it will know if it's a short-term attachment or a long-term attachment. If it's a short-term attachment, it will literally use this person as much as it can over a short amount of time, and it can literally make people do some really full-on sexual things that they would have never have done, and all of a sudden they could get caught in, you know, some really full-on scenarios. Like some of the people I've worked with, you know, after this energy has left and they've come to me because they're not sure what's going on, they've, you know, had stories of all sorts of stuff. Some young beautiful girls have had situations where they had this thing attached, and then for maybe a month they were just, you know, all of a sudden getting caught up in lots of group sex and drugs and just being used by lots of different men at once and all sorts of really gross stuff that they would never have normally gone into and cannot even. The thing that amazes me is after this happens, it's almost like they can't understand how it happened. They can't understand how they did this. It's almost like they feel like they were slightly possessed, because it does feel like a bit of a possession after this energy's gone, because the person cannot believe when they go over what they've just experienced. It's like this massive disconnect because it wasn't actually their own, you know, kind of desires fueling the experience. So now, after they've, like, this energy's gone and they're just left with the memories of what they went through and what they've done, it's like they just cannot understand how it happened. So if they come to someone like me and I'm able to kind of go, well, I found this energy, you did have something operating through you, this is what it does, they're able to make sense of what made them do the things they've experienced. So it's a really, really full-on energy to have kind of come through. Some people don't have as much, you know, if the energy hasn't used them completely, you know, it's left for some other reason, they might not feel this to the same extent. But I've worked with a lot of people who have felt really used and really, really depleted and just not understand what's happened to them. So that's what I find interesting. It knows that if it's going to be a short-term situation, it will go in and just use, like the example I just gave you about this, you know, this one girl I'm thinking of, or two girls in particular who had this experience where this particular serpent had attached to them for a month, got them to do some wild and crazy things that never would have normally done, and then left. They were left with this kind of dirty, gross, used, violated feeling, and really depleted, and lots of, you know, just like drained and chronic fatigue energy. Now, under that situation, this energy knew it was a short-term host and just used them completely, wore them down. But if this energy attaches to somebody and it decides that it wants to host for a long period of time, this energy won't go to that extreme. It won't kind of get them to do such full-on stuff. It will get them to do stuff slowly, like it won't kind of wear them down. If this entity wants to attach to someone for a long period of time, it won't wear them down and use them out quickly, because it knows that it wants to keep them at a certain level to keep operating through them. So you'll find that if you find people, or you come across somebody with this entity still in them, or it comes up as this energy, but the actual entity is gone, but this energy is still kind of affecting them, then it will either be a quick visit and the person could have had some full-on experiences and then it's just gone, or the person, if it's a long-term stay, the person might not feel the effects the same way because this entity is just playing them, you know, in a gentler way because it wants to host for longer. So that's the two types of kind of, you know, situations you could find yourself in. Having clients that had a short interaction with this entity but are still suffering the after effects, or you might find someone with this energy still operating, but they're not really noticing it as much because it's kind of just keeping them at a nice pace to use them for longer. So you can find the two things, short-term or long-term stays. Now, over many, many years of doing hands-on healing for people, I have had people come to me because they've actually awoken to the fact that this energy is operating through them. So sometimes people can actually become conscious of this energy operating through them, and they may seek someone like you and I out for this type of work because they're actually conscious of this energy. So you can find people coming to you because they're aware that something's using their sexual energy and it's not their desires and it's not their focus. Now, if somebody's aware of this energy and they feel like something's been using them, I usually find by that stage that this entity is actually left by that stage. Sometimes I find people becoming conscious just after this thing has left. It's almost like once the thing leaves, they're able to go, oh, that wasn't me. Something was wrong. Something wasn't quite right. I'm feeling really violated. And sometimes it's that particular point when this thing leaves that they have the consciousness and awareness to go, that wasn't me. Something wasn't right. And that may be when they go looking for somebody that deals with a little bit weirder energy, like someone like you and I. You know, they'll know that someone who is, you know, qualified at dealing with negative energy is the person to go to because they'll feel that this energy wasn't positive and they want some answers to what was going on and operating through them. Now, if this energy has operated through them and then left, there's still going to be energetic damage. So, you know, even if you don't pick up a serpent entity in somebody, they still can hold the energetic damage of this energy. So it will scan up as a serpent entity, even if the serpent has left. So if this person has serpent energy, it might not mean that it's got the entity still attached. It may just be the leftover energy, because this entity leaves a lot of damage behind at mind, body, and soul level. So if this energy scans up, you know, we're going to be clearing the energy and the entity. And even if the entity has gone, we're still clearing the energy if this scans up. So we're clearing it all up for the person, which is hugely beneficial. Now, the serpent entity is the energetic pet to the Changeling Collective, and we're going to talk about the Changeling Collective a little bit later. But they use this particular entity as a kind of recruiting pet. They send this pet, you know, this particular entity out to go looking for others to then start infecting. And by infecting other people, the Changeling Collective can kind of start recruiting people, you know, into their collective. And I'll talk, like I said, I'm going to talk more about that a bit later. But this particular entity is the energetic pet for the Changeling Collective. So it's used as a recruitment entity. So this energy likes to work and operate through people and would rather hang around large groups or homes with lots of porn or low-grade sexual energy. Now, when I say low-grade sexual energy, meaning sexual acts that are out of alignment for the person. So there's no right or wrong when it comes to sexual activity. There's no this is wrong, this is good. But we can have what is in alignment to us. There is a certain alignment for each person that is very different for each person. And when we use sexual energy, if it's out of alignment, it's out of alignment. Now, what's in alignment for me sexually might be out of alignment for you sexually, and vice versa. So we're not talking about right and wrong things. There's no right and wrong, but there is what's in alignment and what's not for each person, and that's very, very different. So I just want to be really clear that we're not talking about certain positions or sexual acts that are wrong and right. It's just what's in alignment for each person. And once someone starts to go out of alignment in their sexual energy, it can create all sorts of issues for them. So knowing what feels right and what's good and what's in alignment for you individually is what is in alignment for you and what's right for you. So it's very, very much about the alignment and what feels right for the person compared to like actual acts or sexual positions. We're not talking about that, okay? So I want to make that really, really clear. It has nothing to do with the acts or the fantasies or anything about anybody. There's no right or wrong. It's only what's in alignment and what's out of alignment for each person, and it's very different for each person, as I said. So this is the reason why this energy, like I never ever find this energy like kind of hanging around homes that has just like, you know, a little old lady, you know, like a little old lady living on her own who just is, you know, like in her 70s and just pottering around doing her thing. This energy is not going to go hang around a 70-year-old lady's home. Do you know what I mean? It's just not interested. This energy, if it's hanging around someone's home, it's hanging around because there's high sexual energy, and it will have a lower tone to it. So it will be just, it's really hard to explain that particular part, you know, but it's, I'm feeling like if you're listening to this, you'll get me. You know, somebody's in a home where, like just say there's a few people living in a home together, and you know, one of them's like a porn, you know, an addict who likes to sit in his room or her room watching heaps of porn all day. Do you know what I mean? And that's their thing. They just consume porn most of the day. Now, if that's going on in one room, and in the other room there might be someone who is, you know, just really desperate for love and just constantly looking for attention, and they might, you know, have constant dates going on with sexual energy constantly, and you know, they're all in that please love me vibe where they're just looking for energy, and you know, there might be all this different types of stuff going on, and that synergy of those people, because it's kind of lower vibration, it's not like people in their power, like people who are in their integrity, in their power and in their alignment, this energy won't come near them. So this energy wants to look for people who are out of alignment and out of integrity in themselves with this sexual energy. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, thank you. Finally, so it's basically looking for people who are not in alignment and who are out of their own integrity and out of their own power, especially when it comes to their sexual energy. So this is what this entity likes to hang around, and it likes a lot more than just one person. So even if I'm living on my own and I'm a porn addict or something like that, this energy, it will come around and have a look, but it will want to attach straight away. If it's not able to attach straight away, it won't hang around just one person. It definitely likes more energy. It likes more to bounce off. It likes more to charge off, and it likes having people around that are a lot higher sexual energy with lower vibrational tones all interacting, because that's when this energy gets a lot more possibilities for attachment and feeding. So attachments are quite, you know, a little bit of an epidemic, as you can imagine. There's so much sexual energy, you know, that's out of alignment on this planet. We breed pornography like it's going out of fashion. There's so much underground pornography and really, you know, full-on stuff going on. So this energy is going rampant, and it is a little bit of an epidemic on this planet right now. So the chances are you will find this energy, you know, come up occasionally in clients because it is an energy that is getting more and more common. So don't be surprised if you find it. Be very, very aware that the person that it has been attached to may feel too ashamed to even talk to you about what's been going on for them sexually. It's very hard for them to open up to somebody about this sort of stuff. So just be aware and be sensitive that if this energy comes up, that, you know, the person's not necessarily going to tell you, oh my God, I've just been, you know, involved in some massive group sex or something for the last month that I would never have normally done. They might not have told you that. They might open up sometimes if they feel really safe and secure and your information is really good without judgment, then they will open up. But you know, some people won't open up to this particular experience because they're so shameful of what could have gone on. Not always, but could have. This energy can hibernate and it can live in someone's inner world for lifetimes. So, you know, it can hibernate. This particular entity, if it wants to and needs to, it can hibernate for a very, very, very long time without being fed, and then, you know, kind of reactivate itself later on, either in later on in someone's life or in a different life altogether. So twice or three times in my whole career found this particular entity hibernating, like had hibernated for a whole lifetime just to be in the right position in this lifetime. So it definitely can hibernate for a very long time. Not very common because it would have to be a really good reason for it to hibernate for that long. Normally it wouldn't want to do that, but it can happen. But they also can hide deep within someone's inner world as well. So, you know, just because you don't pick one of these things up in somebody straight away, it doesn't mean that this energy is not operating really, really deep down. And if it's operating really deep down, it means that it has made the decision to use this person as a long-term host. So if it wants to hide and it's not really activated, you won't pick it up unless the person peels back some of these layers or comes to you specifically for a sexual, like because something sexually is not right. If they talk to you and their intention is they want the clearing because sexually they're not feeling right, something's weird, that can be enough to go in and find this thing and remove it. But if the person isn't coming to you because they don't feel like there's anything weird sexually going on, they just feel like they want a clearing, you may or may not pick it up. It depends on how deeply it's hiding. But if the thing is activated and actually is quite common, like quite regularly kind of being activated and using and operating the person and feeding regularly, you will pick it up. It won't hide if it is activated. But if it's not activated, it might be hibernating or it might be slightly active but not enough to be really kind of, you know, influencing the person greatly at this point in time, then you might not find it unless the person has uncovered enough for you to kind of find it. So I know it can be a little bit daunting and a little bit kind of like a lot of information to be like, who hibernates, who doesn't, who will I find, who will I won't find. But what I'm giving you this information for is not so you have to learn this. Please don't think that you have to know every entity and what they do and if they hibernate. This is just sharing with you a frame of reference so you have something to build on. If you don't know every single detail about these energies and if you can't remember what these energies are, you're already giving your brain a frame of reference. So when you go on to do the clearing like I show you and finding the information, you're going to find the information. Just by watching these videos, you're giving your brain, your unconscious part will hold and store this frame of reference. Consciously, you don't have to know everything, okay? You've already got the frame of reference just by listening to it, and that's all you need. Obviously, the more you go into the energy and you like, you know, if you watch this a few times and you start doing the clearings and you start, you know, having certain energy show up, and then you might go back and read a little bit more about it, and then you might have your own aha moment and put things together and the puzzle pieces together, that can happen too. And that's the natural way to start learning about this energy. It's not about study this all until you know it completely. It's just like, you know, let it all sink in the background, knowing that you've got the frame of reference. So, you know, I know it can get complicated when I talk about, you know, if they can attach and how long they can hide for and all that sort of stuff. So don't get overwhelmed with that information. Just know that it's just there to help guide you when you need more information. If you come across this energy a lot, this information you'll start going back to, looking at it, and you'll start getting more and more understanding of how it works yourself as well. So don't freak out about knowing everyone and if they can hide and if they can't. So an example that I want to just share with you with one particular time that I dealt with a serpent entity that really stands out. It was the biggest one that I'd ever dealt with. So I had a long-term client I was working with who had a lot of interaction and influence, like interference from the Changeling Collective, which we'll go into later. And it was a repetitive pattern that he kept having, getting himself into relationships with female changeling women who kept creating all different sorts of interferences for him. Anyway, so he was getting himself out of this particular pattern, and we were shifting a lot of stuff. But this particular time he called me, and he'd been out at a big party, and he'd gone to a dance party, hadn't been for ages, went to this one, was feeling really good and really clear, and then afterwards came back and was feeling really different. And because of working with me for so long, he knew what certain energy felt like. So he called me and said, you know, I've got something going on, can we do a session? And I was like, sure. So opened up to his energy body while he was on the phone to me, and instantly I was standing in my lounge room. It was like the energetic grid of my house just went onto this ecstatic, like electric energy. And as I was trying to find what was causing it in his energy body, as I was trying to look and feel into it, I felt something kind of like hook around me energetically around my waist. And before I knew it, I was like wrestling with a energetic, massive anaconda snake. It felt like an anaconda. It was so, I can't even describe the size, the thickness and the weight and the length of this thing. So I'm on the phone to him, and this thing was constricting me to the point where I couldn't really breathe properly, and I was finding it hard to hold the phone. And the person who I was on the phone with could hear me struggling and started to do work, because we'd done a lot of work together. So he knew how to use his breath and he knew how to work with me. So he was doing that and helping me to kind of get my focus and point of center, so I could drop into a good space within myself, basically stop shitting myself, because it was quite scary, as you can imagine, being constricted from a big snake. Even if it's energetic, this thing was real. So, you know, I dropped in, found the center of point of my power and started to work with this thing to get it. But because of its weight and power and size, it was hard work for a while. As I was getting to the point of being able to start curling this energy into kind of a space that I kind of vortex them out into, like a suction kind of space, as I was almost at the point of loosening it to do that, there was a plastic water bottle on my coffee table that literally got piffed at the back of my head. So I physically had a plastic bottle that was empty, thank goodness, thrown at the back of my head just as I was about to pin it. But it didn't put me off. I got it and I got rid of it. Now, I can't tell you how long it took me to get over that. It took me a while to kind of process the realness of this thing that was around me. Like, it was so freaking real. I cannot even describe how real it was. Like, I had an anaconda wrapped around me trying to strangle me. So it was so real, so tangible. It was so powerful. Normally, when I deal with this energy, it's not as strong as that. It's not as heavy and dense. It's still a powerful energy regardless, but I'd never come across something this old and this kind of like solid. It was really, really full on. So the good thing is, working with the Akashic Records, we don't have the same experience. Like I keep saying, when I'm doing a hands-on healing, I open up someone's energy body, so I get the full experience of what's going on. In the records, we don't have that experience, so you're not going to have this happen to you. But it had to happen to me because this is how I learned to really articulate this energy, to be able to even clear them in the records. So definitely something that had to happen, but something that won't happen to you while you're standing in someone's records, thank goodness. But just wanted to give you a story about that particular one, just to show that these things can be very, very big, like the size of massive anacondas. This is how old these and big these things can get. So interesting, pretty scary at the time. Now I look back, it's, you know, kind of one of the kind of, if I was to think about all the different experiences that kind of showed me how full on these energies can be, that's one story that will hold weight when it comes to this particular one, because it was a very, very powerful and very scary moment for me. So I just wanted to share that story because I find it really fascinating. And like I keep saying, although you're not going to come across the energetics of these things, you're not going to have the personal interaction, it's still really, really good for you to know these stories, because, you know, if you find people telling you things like this, that they can feel, like some people will tell you they can feel like there's a snake coiled around them sometimes. These are the experiences you'll be able to start putting the puzzle pieces together. So I just wanted to share that story. So these things, you know, quite common, not like as common as negative thought form entities, obviously, but these things are still getting more common and common in people because of the breeding that's going on and how easy it is to spawn. So don't be surprised if you do find this energy in some people, but don't expect it to show up every time, obviously, as well. But it is very, very important to understand that this energy is very much a recruiting sort of pet of the Changeling Collective. Unfortunately for this particular entity, it doesn't come from this time, space, or dimension. It is a different dimensional, you know, kind of entity. And the Changeling Collective, they go looking for certain things like this because they know that if they can find a way to use them, they have an ability to use something that's already, you know, a parasitic thing to kind of come into this dimension and to be let loose into this dimension. It's kind of like using something else from a different dimension to be let loose into here to do their dirty work.